kid, we visited the local cemetery often. We would scour the graves to find the oldest one, or we would pick lilacs from the neighboring yard's bushes that were overgrown. Now, that may come across as weird or spooky or creepy, but let me ask you, if you did interpret it that way, why do you think it's spooky or weird or creepy? Probably because in North America, death is a little bit of a taboo subject. And even if you are open to talking about mortality, how often do you really see death? Barring you're not a medical professional or an emergency responder or a funeral director, probably not often. And what you do see has been staged and rehearsed for viewing. Think about your typical North American funeral. Quiet, staged, stuffy, dark, and limited interaction with the dead body. I think more and more we are seeing people move away from this traditional style of funeral into something that's more reflective of the deceased person's life. For example, a celebration of life, where the person's favorite music might be played and guests are invited to wear bright colors. But still, I crave more. I want to reduce the stigma around talking about death and dying. I want my end-of-life wishes to be known. It's natural burial. I don't want death care to be something that only happens behind closed doors. I want family members to be as active as a participant in death care for their family members or for themselves as they see fit. At the beginning, I talked about how often I would visit the cemetery as a kid, but I didn't explain why we were there. Usually a couple times a year, but at the very least every Mother's Day, my mom and her sisters would gather at the cemetery, mini shovel in one hand, petunias in the other, ready to tend to the grave of their parents. They would trim the bushes, they would plant new flowers, and they would make memories. This act of tending to their parents' grave has been a huge factor in making my mom and her sisters very close and helping them develop a sense of autonomy over their parents' death. For me, it showed me that it's okay to keep your loved ones close, even in death, and even 20 years later. This example of my mom and her sisters is just one of the many ways that people can become more involved in the death care of their loved ones. Being more involved in the funeral process is another. Today, cremations are more popular than traditional burial, and witness cremation is an option available where the family can view the cremation as it happens. This has been happening in many faiths for a long time, for example, Hinduism. This offers people another way to say goodbye and be caretakers of their own deceased. In some places, family members are even allowed to press the button that closes the door or starts the heat source of the retort. But what if you don't want to be cremated or have a traditional burial because it doesn't align with your values, or you're an environmentalist, or for another reason? Well, luckily, you've got options. Number one, aquamation. I don't have time to get into it here, but I encourage you to look into it on your own. Think water cremation. Second, natural burial. We'll get into that one in a second. And third, hopefully one day we will have human composting here in Ontario. Again, sorry to leave you hanging on that one, but I really encourage you to Google recompose to find out more. For me, based on the options that we have in Ontario right now, my first choice is natural burial. In natural burial, the body is not embalmed and it's placed in a biodegradable vessel such as a wood or cardboard box or a cotton shroud, which is then placed in the ground. In the natural burial section of cemeteries, there's usually indigenous plants and the grass is not mowed or maintained like other sections of the cemeteries are. And some cemeteries even have apiary boxes in this section. There usually aren't individual tombstones, but some cemeteries offer alternatives such as a large marker that would have everyone's name and death date in that section displayed. What's really cool about natural burial isn't just the environmentalist aspect, but also how well it lends itself to fostering that breakdown of stigma and encouraging families to participate in the death care of a loved one or themselves. Which is what I did. I made my own shroud. Now, you don't have to make your own, but it might be something that a family would like to do with a deceased or a dying family member. Again, my question is, what are we so scared of? Spoiler alert, we're all going to die. And once we accept that death is a part of life, and we actively participate in death care rituals and preparation, we maybe won't be left feeling so incredibly empty when death happens.